Hey everyone, I'm Reggie Williams, founder and CEO of Ambrosia for Heads, and with me I have Jake Payne, our editor in chief, and together this is our What's the Headline podcast. What's going on, man?
Yo, man, doing well. Another exciting week, man, and I in a different way than last week, right? Like you and I kind of coming into this, we were like, yo, well, should we skip this week? Should we? And I was like, no, man, there's so much good music out, and also there's kind of a spillover, if you will, from some of the headlines last week, man. And I think that's always exciting. That tends to be what happens, right?
That's aftermath, right? Yeah, we always, we try and be transparent here, and we're going to get into this a bit later on in the podcast, but we strive to only talk about things when they're relevant. That's the philosophy of the site from day one, that we're really curating and sticking to the quality stuff instead of just trying to like get clicks and page views and whatever it may be. So yeah, but I think there's some quality stuff. Let's start with the aftermath. So last week was all about Drake and Kanye. And this week we got some follow-ups. So Drake comes in with the best-selling album of 2021 so far, 604,000 total equivalent albums. So that streams, YouTube views, like, whatever metric you can consider. He broke records last week, best-selling or best streaming album ever in one day, 24-hour period. All for Certified Lover Boy. So a week later, kind of what's your take on the album? Have you listened to it again?
Both with CLB and Donda, I kind of come back to the songs that I've earmarked for myself and added into my own playlist. I haven't, since we last spoke on this, run it end to end again. And that doesn't really surprise me. What about you?
I've listened to both end to end. Donda continues to be a struggle for me. Just like 2 hours is just way too long. I don't have that. I barely have that time for anything, maybe a movie. And speaking of which, I saw Candyman yesterday, and shout out to Jordan Peele because he did it again, man. I think it's his second best movie. Us wasn't really my thing, but this one was really, really good. And I think, it's going to go down as a classic, and he completely reinvented it. But just, I digress on that. But 2 hours, and that wasn't even 2 hours, right? So
yeah,
to watch a story unfold of that magnitude, in less than 2 hours, I think that an album can do the same in less than an hour or so.
Yeah, and I mean with Kanye too, it's not a gripping narrative. I mean, let's just be real. Unless there's something I'm missing, and I know that it's a personal album and it's spiritual and it has tie-ins to his late mother, but the way I interpret it, just as a fan and as somebody who's been in the music business 20 years, it's an album, and then it's kind of like some remixes or some alternate takes. And that's not an easy listen. That's different than a 2 hour double album, Stevie Wonder, something like that. Even the albums we spoke about last week from Tupac or Biggie, or as one of our YouTube commenters said, Wu-Tang Clan with Wu-Tang Forever. It's just a different type of experience when you're getting the same song a second time with a different verse or a different guest. The incentive is far less.
Yeah, although I will say that some of the concepts have opened up to me in a different way. I think that the hot take on Jail Part 2 with the Baby and Marilyn Manson was that Kanye was making a statement about cancel culture. But I don't think that that's what the statement was. I think that Kanye, we all know, has really embraced his faith over the last couple of years. Not to say that it wasn't there before, obviously, with Jesus Walks and things like that, but he's been extremely vocal and explicit about it as of late. And I think that the message that he's trying to send is that all sinners, no matter what their sin may be, are can be redeemed through the grace of God. And I think that's the message that he's trying to send with the Baby, with obviously his homophobic remarks, and with Marilyn Manson, who is accused of some really serious sexual misconduct, sexual assault. So I thought that was interesting, and I think there are going to be other things that kind of open up with that album over time.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be curious, Kanye, you and I spent time last week talking about Keem and Kendrick's, family ties. Kanye is a master of visuals. And I think that his videos, especially with The Life of Pablo, brought that album into other dimensions. And I'm curious with this one, what that's going to look like, especially in a pandemic / post-pandemic world of what's viable. Can you get guests together, etc. But yeah, I mean, Kanye doesn't do throwaway visuals either.
Yeah, I mean, I think the listening parties were a sneak peek into that. I mean, the first one was very almost reminded me of Kanye's Runaway performance on the VMAs that year,
Yeah.
where he had that massive stage and it was just him in a red suit walking, back and forth on the white stage, and I think it's white piano.
Well, he had an MPC on a marble.
Oh, right.
I mean, like, to me, and not to digress either, but to me that is certainly of the 2010s, because I think that was the beginning of 2010. I mean, one of the top 3 hip hop performances on television that I've ever seen.
Yeah, it's one of the most iconic visuals, and that entire listening session, the first one, was done in that format. Just him like walking almost like a lion, like, caged across the entire Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta. Pretty epic. And then he did something completely different for the second one. He had probably upwards of a couple hundred people, obviously very choreographed. We never got into it, but I think that there were a couple of yays there, because the dude in the middle who was supposed to be Kanye was actually kind of swollen, was doing like push-ups effortlessly and stuff like that in a way that I just don't see Ye's arms and chest like producing. And then there was a close-up of a dude who had a much more similar gait to Kanye in the middle of it. And it's interesting to me that a lot of people didn't pick up on that, but with the mask, it was very easy for him to pull an MF Doom of sorts,
Yeah, I was thinking Doom, and then a headline you had years ago, Kanye is the Andy Kaufman of rap, I think it was.
Yeah.
And Andy Kaufman used to do stuff like that, not with himself, but with the Tony Clifton character. There were several different people that could play that kind of alter ego, and it's definitely interesting, and I think we're going to get more. I'm real curious too of what the next visual we're going to get from Drake. I mean, obviously he chased kind of like I said, the Good Morning America crowd, in my opinion, with the Too Sexy video. I want to see how Drake does a rollout for some of these songs that in the hip hop community we're unpacking and talking about.
Yeah, I mean, he's a master of memes. And, even I didn't even pick up on it until someone pointed out to me that the album cover is a living visual. Have you noticed that the emojis actually move? Their expressions change. They rub their bellies. They sway back and forth. That's just crazy. And so Drake, But before we get on that, like, one more thing about Kanye. So I do think that the way that the visuals kind of stepped up with the listening parties are going to be, amplified, times 10 with his concert, with his tour, which sounds like it's going to be pretty imminent. But I'm curious, do you think that, if what he's saying is true, that UMG released it without his permission? Do you think that there's a possibility his plan might have been just to make this like an exhibit, kind of like with what Wu had done with their album that there was only one copy for?
Yeah, I've seen they did something like that, with his traveling. That's a really good point. I don't think so. I mean, I think that for as powerful as Kanye is, and he still has to find a way to monetize this for the record label and the distributor that he's signed to.
But he was making a couple million a show on merch.
Yeah, but I mean, we don't know the terms of the deal, but does Def Jam get a piece of that? At this point of renegotiation, I don't know, but I feel like he has to deliver an album. My suspicion is the album was ready. Kanye, there probably was a Saturday night call of like, yo, boom, we're going to do this. But there was probably one more caveat. Like, Kanye had to George Bush the button. And I'm sure that he didn't get that call, or he didn't sign off on the final go through. And, it's different in these days. You and I, even when we upload this podcast, the minute that we hit publish, sometimes there's a lag time, and that time can vary. And I have a feeling it's just one of those. And Kanye's never been quiet about venting his frustrations with the powers that be. So,
yeah. So on Drake, visuals, is there any video that you particularly want to see made, or any song that you think, lends itself to visualization?
Drake is a great artist. I can't tell you that Drake has made a video that's truly, affected my life. Or, we talked about the way that, Keem and Kendrick, that video brought me into the Keem part of the song. Drake's never done that for me. I'm just keeping it real. Even when you're talking about Best I Ever Had, which Kanye directed, and you had, the beautiful women coming out, and the kind of the basketball theme. He's affected culture, he's shaped culture, but I don't know that, a rapidy rap video from Drake is going to, hit me in the ribs. I just want to see how he does it. And when you look at, the first two songs on the album or the final track, the Poppy's home, I'm curious, but what about you? You've listened to the album more this week in sequence than I have.
Yeah, I think it's going to come from, so the first one was Way Too Sexy, and that had like Kawhi in the background as a background dancer. And, I'm sure a lot of other like hints that we just haven't picked up on because Drake is also a master at that. But, I think it's going to come, I agree with you, from some of the less rapidy rap, the more kind of theatrical songs. I could see a visual with for Girls Want Girls, with Lil Baby. I could see Love All would be a moment if he were to do that with Jay-Z, because to my recollection, there hasn't been a Jay-Z video this year except for Sorry Not Sorry. Him and Nas on Sorry Not Sorry with Khaled, I think is the only one of these guest verses where he's actually done a visual. So to see him and Jay together, I think would be significant.
Yeah, I'm curious if that happens. I mean, I gotta be level with you. I don't know that I've seen Drake get pushed back on a project like this one. You and I last week on this podcast, we talked about it and we put, hard numbers up of what we felt about the album. And those were not, emphatic favor. I said that this album, CLB, is not on my top 15 of the year. And to look at the different publications from all sides of music and culture, I've never seen Drake, and it's not like people are coming out and massively ripping apart the album, but I have seen, it was either the New Yorker or the Atlantic that called this, like a fuckboy album. Like I've never seen Drake get critical, tepid response that he's gotten with this album, which leads me to believe
I have. More Life, he got a very tepid response on that. He also got a pretty tepid response on Views. He hasn't gotten like critical acclaim on an album in quite some time, maybe since Nothing Was the Same.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, and your nose is in that more than mine, because again, I liked More Life, but my point being, Jay, it was so manicured about his, what he gets involved in and to what extent. I don't know that song in particular in this album was met with a, emphatic yes, if Jay's going to come out and do a video for the boy, the kid.
Yeah. I guess it probably also depends on where he is with Kanye these days too,
Word, yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things that came out was that Drake had dissed Swizz Beatz on the album. Did you pick up on that when you first listened to the song as You Only Live Twice?
Yeah, I did. And, there was a headline that I saw in publications immediately after the album dropped. Everyone's trying to find their clickbait. And, I thought it was some clever writing in it, because Drake, what does he do in the song? He references You Fancy. He references an Alicia Keys song. And he kind of responds to what I believe is the genesis of this, which is, after one of the verses, I cannot remember which one right now, Swizz, in an odd breaking character, in my opinion, called Drake the P word, pussy.
Yeah.
Which is crazy. I mean, like I could see 2005 Swizz doing something like that. But I mean, Swizz is one of those artists that I really, every time he speaks, I think he represents our culture so well and so beautifully. And we've covered that a lot over the years on AFH. Now, to Swizz's credit, the very next day he came, retracted the statement, apologized. And, we can speculate, and I think you have an interesting thought on it as to why Swizz may have said that about Drake.
Yeah, so he was a little nice. I remember watching that IG live, and he was definitely a bit tipsy after the celebrating. I can't even remember which one it was. I suspect what prompted it was someone in IG made a comment about Drake and probably asking if Drake was going to do a Verzuz. And I think that Swizz said that. Now, the reason why I think that now is because recently Swizz was on, I think it was the Breakfast Club, or I can't remember what show, but there was chatter about a Kanye versus Drake Verzuz. And that would be, in my opinion, the biggest Verzuz of all time. Like I think that could do like 5 million like real-time streams. Like it would just be almost, I'm not going to get crazy and say Super Bowl numbers, but certainly Super Bowl of music numbers. I think it would certainly rival Tekashi 6ix9ine's, record-breaking IG Live of 2 million streams when he first got back from prison. I think it would be up there with Travis Scott's appearance in Fortnite. I think in this digital age, it would be the biggest event of all time. And Swizz intimated that Kanye was down to do it, but they couldn't get Drake on board. And so I think that his response in calling him that was him saying that Drake was afraid to go against Kanye on Versus. What do you think?
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, at the time, people speculated that it was in regards to a leaked Busta Rhymes and Drake track. And I, at the time, suspected that it was about paperwork. Drake and Swizz had made great records early in Drake's career. They haven't really followed that up. And I thought this is just a paperwork thing of Drake not clearing a song or whatever. And also, I mean, Swizz has stayed in Kanye's camp in recent years, whereas I perceive his relationship with Drake to get further and further apart. So at the time, that was what I speculated. But I really like your reasoning too, because if that were to happen, that would make Versus, for as far as that platform has come in the last year and a half, that would push it into that would make it meteoric. And I don't ever see that happening. I think Kanye would do it in a heartbeat. And I think that one of the, the fact that the locks are on Donda, and from what I've read, less than 24 hours, they defeated Dipset on that. You can check our podcast episode on that one. Boom, they go to Atlanta to work on it. And so Kanye, who's such a student of real-time pop culture, watches this thing. And in my mind right now, Kanye is looking for a way to climb back. And he could do that through something like Versus. I don't think there could be an upside for Drake. I think Drake is the perceived, got the upper hand right now. And I think it would be his battle to lose. And I don't know that Drake, with antics in real time on video like that, could ever compete with somebody who's done it for, damn near 20 years with Ye.
I disagree firmly. I think that Drake, I've got a playlist that is over 100 songs with Drake albums, Drake singles, Drake features, and every single song is a hit. Drake could do an entire tour where he did 10 nights in a row, different sets every night, just pure hits. And Kanye, as great as he is, I think he wins artistically for sure. We've had that conversation, and very few have done what Kanye has done in terms of artistic achievement. But pure hits, pure bangers, I don't know that anyone could compete with Drake, period, across the board.
Yeah, I mean, it just reminds me of Locks and Dipset. And, I don't know that Drake's showmanship, I mean, for as good as he is, and to be 100% fair and transparent, I have never seen Drake live. Have you?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
Good, great show.
I think it was the Take Care tour, and it was fine. It was there was nothing special about it. It wasn't Kanye. Kanye puts on a show, but I don't know that the Versus would be at that level, although they've been getting higher and higher production quality. And so I could see it. But I'll say this, like, Drake is really good at subs, and he's really a fantastic, as great a marketer as Kanye is. Drake is also a fantastic marketer in a different way, in that he plants little seeds and lets them grow, and they're almost like Easter eggs. Whereas Kanye is much more, set himself on fire kind of approach, where it's really just spectacle. And so I'll give you this. I could see Drake taking the baby face approach. where
Okay.
he's just real slick about it, real talking real
Yeah.
greasy, smiling the whole time and just slicing you the whole time. I could see him taking that approach and making moments. He's really great at making memes. We know that from Hotline Bling and all sorts of stuff and Tootsie Slide and whatever. I could see him just being so strategic that every single minute would become like memes, like going forward.
I support that analogy, and I think if Drake were to, if it were to happen, that would be a great way for him to go about it too. Because if you hit Kanye with an icy or an upper-handed, kind of aesthetic dynamic, Kanye could very easily, Teddy Riley himself.
Oh man. Okay, so there's been increased pushback on Drake over time. My experience in talking to people has been there's been increased favorability toward Donda. A lot of people have said that they really like it, that it's really touching to them. People have talked about crying and things like that. Have you been hearing that too? Or what's
No,
your
I haven't heard that. I did see an interesting tweet. It made headlines this week that Pusha T liked it. I wasn't really interested in that aspect of it. That doesn't surprise me. But the second day numbers of CLB went down, which you would presume for a lot of albums. I don't know. Drake, it wouldn't surprise me if they went up too, but Kanye's went up significantly on day two. And to me, the devil's in the details there, because Kanye released the album at 8 a.m. on the East Coast on a Sunday after weeks, if not months of anticipation. It just happened to, I texted you, it's out, and you were like, yo, MFR, it was out 4 hours ago. It just kind of like slid through the goal. And meanwhile, Drake had all of this, anticipation and lead up. So of course, by Monday, Kanye is going to have this spillover. But I do see, now that both albums are out and it's kind of turned into a this or that discussion, I definitely do see Donda getting the more love. So I agree with that, but I've yet to come across people that, have said it's affected them that way. I did play, like I said, the curated joints on my playlist this week, driving around, in the city, all of that. And, I was curious because I thought about it. I was like, I haven't heard any car, playing the music yet on that one. I have with Drake, but, so.
Yeah, well, you see, you raised an interesting point. I'm wondering if Kanye had released on that Friday instead of Sunday when everyone was anticipating, if it would have had bigger stream numbers than Drake. Because when it was released at like 8 a.m., I think Eastern time, on a Sunday morning, with no one having any idea that it was coming. And so it took time for people to even find it. But I wonder if that really hurt his streams.
I would think so. And I didn't put it together at the time, and it kind of speaks to your question about Kanye blaming UMG, but that's usually the time the old folks are going into church on the morning, like that early service. And, this album, I know he put out Jesus is King, 2 years ago, and that was the gospel album. That was the Christian hip hop album. But this one, I mean, for anyone that's listened to it, spirituality and faith and God and Jesus are huge themes of the album. So yeah, but he did himself no favors putting it out then. And to me, oddly enough, the album is one of those albums that I think sounds better at night. It's one of those albums that if you're going to listen to, you can listen to in the final 2 or 3 hours of the night, provided you've got the time. But that's when it sounds best.
Yeah, it's a dark album, but the last three albums or so that he's made, I think, are dark albums. I think it started with Yeezus, which is very, very dark. Ye is pretty dark also, and Life of Pablo for sure. So yeah, it's interesting, man. So one of the things that came out of Kanye's album, one of the best things literally came out, actually, meaning that it was taken out of the album. And that was a song called Life of the Party featuring Kanye and Andre 3000. Now you broke the story. You want to set up let's talk about the angle that we approached it first, and then let's get into the song.
Yeah, I talked about it a little bit in the last episode, but a snippet from Kanye's July 18th listening session, which I believe was in Las Vegas, not one of the live streamed events, but somebody had cut a snippet of Andre 3000 and Kanye, made this song together. And all we got was a snippet. And then, both albums come out. Donda's out, CLB is out. The same day, the same weekend that CLB drops, Drake goes on his Sirius XM radio platform that he currently has, and he plays the whole version. And, there's one thing that's important there is Kanye's verse in the song, "This is Drake." He mentions, some of their text exchanges that seem like Kanye was working towards peace. It involves Virgil Abloh and Kid Cudi. But he also says to Drake in the text something on GD, which can mean, on God, like, yo, I mean this, but it can also be a reference to the Gangster Disciples. And which if the case is a threat. So Drake plays the whole song. And what's interesting about it is in the wake of that, Andre 3000 steps out and goes, hey, I didn't want to be involved in this. The verse that I recorded on the song, which we're going to talk about in a second, was met with another verse entirely by Kanye. And that subsequently changed. I have respect for Kanye. I have respect for Drake. I want to work with anyone that's inspiring. And he gave a list of artists that include Kendrick Lamar, Jay-Z. I'm trying to think of some of the others. Well, Tyler.
Yeah.
Possibly a few other people that he wanted to work with. And that was that. And to me, we covered it on the site, and I felt as though the headline was, Andre 3000 got dragged into this. And I believe that was a headline. I know that is, it's accurate and it's salacious at the same time. We've seen that before where, somebody will say one thing on a song that brings a lot of attention to the record. But what's different about this one is the content of Andre 3000's verse, because he's talking about his late mother. And, in a way, and you and I have run into this in the past, in a way, I think there's two headlines. I think that is the news story. But one of the things that I think we're going to do here that we didn't get a chance to do on the site is just talk about how amazing that verse is from Andre 3000 on that song.
Yeah, I got to say, so I didn't hear the full song until maybe 4 or 5 days ago. Had you heard it before then?
I heard it one time, and it was a breaking story when we covered it. And the unreleased music's a funny thing, right? Because it happens, and there's people, and I'm sure we've all run into this. We try to find something that's not authorized to be out, and you can find versions on YouTube that are sped up, that are slowed down, versions where some bus stop rapper will add a verse of themselves in there with the upload. We included a version of the song, but I'm not sure, and with all that was going on, that it was the version that you and I later texted ourselves this week, which is currently in the article right now.
Yeah, so I got to say that, first of all, I think this is the best song that the album created. It is just a masterful song. And the unfortunate thing about Kanye's verse too is that the Drake beef got the headlines, but it was a much more comprehensive verse than just, than Drake. He was also very personal about his mom and about a bunch of other things. We'll unpack it. But Andre 3000's verse was an absolute masterpiece. Like, I don't want to be hyperbolic, but it is one of the greatest verses I've ever heard from Andre 3000 in my lifetime. And Andre 3000 is obviously one of the greatest MCs and has so many great verses from, 16 Ain't Enough, the joint with I think T.I., Sorry. He's got, just over the years, just his guest verses have just been phenomenal, let alone the stuff that he did with Outkast. But this one is above and beyond. He is, well, first of all, he frames the whole thing as a conversation with Miss Donda, Kanye's mom. And that's a refrain that continues throughout the song, where he's talking to Miss Donda, who's obviously in heaven. And he's talking to her about things like, the fact that he feels like, well, actually, I'm gonna step back. Before I get into that, I want to say it's interesting to me that arguably the two best verses of the year come from hip hop's two biggest recluses. And that's Andre and then Lauryn Hill, because you and I have had the same conversation about the best verse of the year regarding Lauryn and her song with Nas. But I think that this one even surpasses that. What they both have in common is they're deeply personal, very autobiographical. Lauryn caught us up about what she's been doing over the last, X amount of years. She talked about like people ridiculing her for being late, but she's trying to be great. Um, she really got into a lot of things that she's been attacked about online in a way that made you know that she's been paying attention and she's actually got an opinion and feelings about these things, and she was like articulating them on an incredibly artful level. Andre, by contrast, really talks about the complicated relationship that he's had with his mom, both in life and in death. And so he starts out by saying to Miss Donda that he's been feeling like he's lost connection with his mom. Now, his mom died in 2013 at the age of 58, which is really, really sad because that's such a young age. But it seems like he's felt like he's had those signs from her, and I don't know about you, but, I lost my dad in December, and I lost a cousin I was close to recently. And there are things that we experience as human beings that, whether they're signs or we're just putting meaning on them, feel like the person is connecting with us. So my dad flew a French flag outside of his house, and I was walking in my neighborhood recently, and I saw somebody had a French flag flying. And then, my cousin was in a group called Hillside, which I'd never heard of back in our hometown. And literally 2 blocks away from me is a street called Hillside, and there's a Hillside Deli. So these things that just pop up that take on new meaning. I think a lot of people see as ways that the people we've lost communicate with us in this life. But he says that, Miss Donna, he feels like he's been losing connection with his mom. And so, and he questions whether there's a heaven at all because of that. And, but then he talks about that there actually have been little signs like, babies crying and the way the grass feels on them that reminds him. But have you ever had any kind of signs like that?
Absolutely. I lost my grandfather July 1st, 96. Like, he literally died in my arms unexpectedly. And July 1st is always a weird day for that. And, this year in particular, it's 25 years. And things happen on those days on July 1st that make me think of him. It could be, like a star twinkling or something like that. Not as, your explanation is a powerful one, but there are signs in the air. And I think of a lot of the people that I've lost. There's, even walking around Philadelphia, there's these signs of you got to pick up after your dog, curb your dog. And a buddy of mine from high school stole one of those signs when he was in Philly. And later he passed away. And every time I see that sign, I think of Tom, and they're all over the city. So yeah, I mean, and that's it. And the way that I love hip hop so much, because I truly believe there is a song for everything. And I know there's people out there that are passionate about other genres, but when you look at Dre's verse in particular on this song, I don't know that there's ever been a song quite like it. And it speaks to a dynamic of, our connections to really important people that have passed away that I'm sure is in everyone's life.
Yeah. I mean, so he starts off talking about their communication and relationship after her life. And then he gets into the dynamic they had when she was alive. And he talks about, it's just so masterful the way he does it, because he'll tell a story about something about himself that will open up all sorts of information about what the person was doing. So he'll say that he used to try to get his mom to stop smoking by smoking weed himself, but then he reveals that he quit smoking weed for 20 years, but has recently restarted. So, and then he talks about how his mom overstepped at times, and he resists the temptation of painting her as a perfect person. Typically we'll go back and romanticize people and make them something bigger than life after life. But this to me is almost like Dear Mama, where Tupac is very, very transparent and real.
Crack fiend, black queen.
Exactly, yeah. About his mother. And, I think that's what makes it resonate even more, is because we all have complicated relationships with our parents, and with our kids if we are parents. So, 3 Stacks does that. He talks about the fact that he liked going to church, not because of the religious aspect, but because there was a girl there that he was, actually having sex with at church, and calls it both pure and perverted. But And that's the line actually that it seems like got the song taken off of the album. But you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I saw a remark and I spoke about it in the last episode where, there was a question over Donda not having any curses. And there are curses on Donda that are bleeped out. The Locks verse, for sure. It's either Chic or Jadakiss has that where there's dead spots in the record. But when Andre 3000 learned of the intent of that, the artistic intent, the song didn't come out. And I wasn't sure if that was because of Kanye's part or Andre's part. But from what you're saying and what we now know, a week or so later, that's what withheld the song. But it's so interesting to me that, unreleased music is funny, right? Like you and I had a conversation recently about posthumous records. And I know you love, we both are huge fans of Tupac. I listen to the posthumous stuff. You don't, decidedly. Leaks are a funny thing too. And as a kid, I got really excited when you could hear something that not everyone else has. And now they're funny too, because you don't know what Andre heard when he said that to what Kanye heard. And I do agree with the point you make. I don't think that Kanye's verse is by any means a throwaway. I think that it's a bit unfair that he used it as an opportunity to get kind of rap political with Drake. But it makes me wonder what Dre heard in Ye to do his verse in the first place, if that makes sense.
Well, so Kanye, and I don't know, to your point, what verse that Dre heard, but Kanye also does talk about his mom a little bit, but he also he really more focuses on his artistic journey. He talks about the fact that he was the father of the styles of most MCs now through 808 and Heartbreaks, and that's something you and I have talked about in conjunction with this album. That he has a lot of the younger MCs, and some people could see that as clout chasing. But in reality, he has as much a right as anyone to do it because most of their styles were actually influenced by him. And he talks about being on the outs with Sci-Hi the Prince, who is arguably his greatest creative collaborator, from the days of, did he write Jesus Walks? I can't remember. No, that was Rhyme Fest. But Sci-Hi came on board definitely during My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy and was with him for Cruel Summer and Ends in Paris and Yeezus and a lot of great songs. And Sci-Hi actually was a writer on Sicko Mode with Travis Scott and Drake, which I'm sure was a sensitive spot for Ye, given how we've talked about extensively how complicated his relationship is with Drake. But one of the things that Sci-Hi apparently said to Kanye is that Sicko Mode was his greatest achievement, writing wise. And so I can imagine how that may have made Kanye feel, given that one, it wasn't one of his songs, and two, it was a song that featured Drake. And
dissing Kanye, arguably.
Yeah, exactly. And so he said that because of that, like that's basically why their relationship has been on ice for the last few years. And so I thought that was really interesting. There's an interview that on Vlad TV where Sci-Hi talks about this extensively. But what was your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a stream of consciousness verse. It's Kanye venting in real time. But again, I mean, if you and I are working on something and I show it to you and you contribute, and then I get the final, I get the final edit, final cut, and I do something. I mean, Kanye is very aware of culture, very aware of how things are perceived. He said great things on the record. It's fine that he said what he said about Drake, but he should have checked in with Andre. And I know that this record was not put out, but somebody leaked it. Somebody did that. And I feel, for as great as Dre's verse is, I feel sad for him that we're getting this. And I don't disagree with what you said either. I think this is truly, definitely a top 3 verse. I gotta listen to it and Lauren side by side, but that this wasn't kind of done the right way. I mean, you just got to feel some type of way with that.
Yeah, I think there's 2 different points though. So one other thing I wanted to note on the Kanye verse is that he talks about protecting his daughters from, he doesn't ever want his daughters to end up in Playboy, and that they talk about over sexualization in the house. I thought that was really, really ironic, given the fact that Kim Kardashian and her sisters and half sisters, that the Kardashian Jenners, have made an entire economy on very sexualized imagery. I think it was Paper Magazine where she broke the internet with nude pictures and things like that. Literally. And, we all know about the sex tape and stuff like that. So it sounds like there's a really deep conflict at Kanye's core about this because, clearly the woman he loves loved and the mother of his child, and who even knows what the status of the relationship is now, given her appearances with the kids and stuff at the listening parties. But to put a line like that is also incredibly vulnerable. So I don't know that I would judge his verse as not being as personal as Andre's verse. And the Drake stuff is definitely a part of that, but that's also a personal thing for Ye and a vulnerability, because him acknowledging these things shows that Drake is on his mind and affecting him in a way that people might not have known had he not said those things. But putting that aside, it's unclear to me whether it was Dre who, I don't think Dre pulled this verse. I think that it didn't come out because Kanye wanted it to be clean and Dre wanted to have the lyrics stand as exactly they were. Because he said that in the statement that his art needed to stand and be kind of exactly as it was. Because that was the expression that he intended, and the notion of having it bleeped or edited didn't stand with what he saw as the artistic vision and what needed to be said in the verse. So I think it was actually him that didn't give approval, and that's why the song wasn't on, not the other way around.
Interesting.
Or him not giving approval because of the censorship, not because of the diss, I should say.
Word, but I also think from what I read in that same statement that the version that Drake leaked is not the last version. Well, I guess, Dre isn't explicit of whether he heard that or not, but he said that, the version that they made together had a different content from Kanye.
Yeah, so it could have been, I'm sure, and I think he was disappointed in that, but I don't know that it would have stopped him from allowing it. But in any case, do we think that this verse is this song is ever going to come out officially in some way?
I don't think so. I think that this will, and you mentioned, Dre's run of verses. It's funny, he hit a stride in 2007 in particular that's incredible, and a lot of that stuff was on remixes. Jay-Z's 30 something, Rich Boys, Throw Some D's on it. Like, Dre was just hopping on all these remixes. He was in a really inspired place, and you can find that stuff, but it's not on the DSPs. It was never, a lot of it was white labeled, and a lot of it was kind of unofficial. And I think we're right back to that. I can't see this coming out properly. And wouldn't it be something if, truly one of the best verses of the year, was leaked,
Yeah. I wonder, I can't think of another time when something of this magnitude, I guess maybe some of the early iterations of like Detox or something like that, but something that had this kind of impact on the culture, and that was, you know what it was? I think that the first thing, or one of the arguably something that is similar to this, is what ultimately became Bath Salts. So the song with DMX, Jay-Z, and Nas, and the earlier version had Jadakiss. That leaked back in 2013, 2014, something like that, or maybe 2015, 2016.
February of 2017 is when
17. Okay.
Is when that came up in the Swizz Beatz Just Blaze battle.
Yeah, so 4 years ago, and we had no idea what it was from, whose song it was, anything like that. And it took 4 years for it to come out, but it eventually did come out, and it still had impact when it did. It didn't have the same kind of impact, I think, that it would have had it come out like a couple months later. But I'm really wondering if this will see the light of the day, because it would be shameful if it didn't, because it's just such a phenomenal verse.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great example of it. Jay-Z has done it a few times. Dear Summer kind of is a freestyle, and then later appears on a Memphis Bleak album, formerly produced. and then, you know, also Ignorant Shit, you know, which was crazy because that came out again just kind of as a freestyle with him and Beanie Siegel, and then it appears on the American Gangster joint at a time when Dre and Beans are not really in the greatest of shape, and on a highly conceptual album it came out. But yeah, I mean, this is something I'll come back to. I hope that the powers that be let it exist on the internet. Certainly at this point, enough people out there have downloaded it. I don't, it's funny to me. I haven't downloaded a song and I can't tell you how long, other than, you know, a press screener or something like that. I haven't done it as a fan. But it really is a gem. And to me, to bring it full circle, that was the frustration, is, you know, everyone's reading into the headline of Drake doing it strategically, but I'm glad you and I here a week later are talking about the art of the song, because that to me is the greatest takeaway.
And speaking of art, so do you think, how much do you commend Andre, if it is the case that he didn't let it be released because he wanted his verse to stand as it was, for his artistic integrity? You think it's integrity? Do you think it is obsessiveness? Where would you put it? Somewhere in between?
Yeah, somewhere in between. I mean, Dre, you know, he's the guy that walks around playing his clarinet. I mean, you know, very inspired by jazz. He even made some songs in recent years that I would classify as jazz. And, you know, you're not going to ask Miles Davis to do another cut once you get a certain point to your career. You're not going to ask Kanye West to do another cut at some point in your career. I mean, these are artists. And the one thing I know of Dre, from the limited interviews and conversations he's done in recent years, he's a man of inspiration. So I think he recorded that in a very inspired moment. It's very personal. You know, some of it may very well have been, you know, kind of written off the dome in a way of just like what you're feeling in that moment. So to come back in and do it any differently or have it changed in post, you don't want that. And I think Dre deserves that. Is truly one of the GOAT lyricists of, you know, any genre, but absolutely hip hop.
Yeah. Well, I gotta say, I hope it comes out, man, because it is truly one of the highlights of hip hop for me so far this year. In the meantime, there was another verse that was noteworthy this week, and I think this one impressed you even more than it did me, and that came from Common. But you want to talk about that?
Yeah, man. You know, it's funny, you and me and freestyles. So, I mean, growing up, I loved, you know, Sway and King Tex, you know, freestyles. I love, you know, the Cali Kings, the places where you could see an MC truly spit was such a big deal to me. And now, you know, in new culture, there's all of these different vehicles and venues for MCs to do that. And you, I think, are a bigger proponent than I. It was you that spotlit the Mickey Fax financial literacy freestyle that we recently talked about with him. But when I get excited about a freestyle, I think it's a big deal, because I'm hard to impress at this point. And I can truly tell you that Common's freestyle on the LA Leakers was the most excited I've been about a freestyle since Black Thought on Funk Flex in December of 2017, maybe 2018, but I think it was 17.
More than J. Cole's LA Lakers freestyle this year?
Yeah, respect to Cole. And I think there's a relationship to Cole and Common with that, because, you know, we've gotten to a point pre-pandemic where, you know, a lot of MCs would appear on Sway in the morning, and you got to do it. You got to do the 5 fingers. I mean, there's some that don't. And some of it's really cool. A lot of it is just kind of a novelty. But somehow in 2020, when this ish all closed down, we had it taken away from us for a while, just all of these venues. And now to watch, you know, J. Cole, absolutely, you know, top 5 of the moment artists, you know, just in terms of impact, consciousness from hip hop, for him to do a freestyle in LA Leakers before the off season, I think was really, really poignant. And it really showed where his head was at in relationship to music making and art and hip hop. And then to have Common do it, it's funny too, because, you know, J. Cole has an album coming out that everyone knows is coming. You know, it's going to be the conversation piece of that week, if not that month. Common's a little different. I mean, Common has had those moments in years past, but I feel like Common, far more than he deserves, gets ignored lately. You know, I think we think of Common as this ambassador of hip hop into, you know, film and into books and all these other things. But we forget that this is a hip hop to the core dude. And he goes on LA Leakers and just reminds you why he's, you know, Calm Sense. and, you know, 2 instrumentals. It was a group home joint, I believe, The Realness.
Living Proof.
Living Proof. Thank you. And then Incarcerated Scarfaces by Raekwon. And Common, you know, Common's always been an elite freestyle in hip hop. And I've seen him as much as I've seen any MC live. He brings that to his live show. He was on Sway and Tech in the 90s. He's brought it to LA Leakers 3 or 4 years ago. But this was a moment for him. And I really, really enjoyed it because it was more than just a dazzling lyrical display. It was him stepping up and doing exactly what I'm talking about, reminding you what he wants to be remembered by before all that other stuff.
Yeah, it had great moments, great punchlines, great pop culture references. I think for me, I enjoyed Cole's freestyle more just because his cadence, he just burned it down with his flow in a way. You know, Common's cadence is very straightforward, whereas I think that Cole's was more intricate, and I think he was more aggressive with it too, lyrically. And I definitely like the beats he chose better, but you know, I just thought that Cole's set him up as like, I think it's the best freestyle of the year still. And I think
Wait,
it's
you like Cole's beats better or Comm's?
I like the beats that Cole rapped over better than the ones that Common rapped over.
You going over Sitting Sideways
Still
over
tipping, and what was the other one? Souls of Mischief, Night to Infinity. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, yeah.
I'm just trying to push you under the bus, man.
No, so it's one. You know what? If I could combine 93 Till Infinity and Incarcerated Scarfaces, then I'm good. You know, but the way that Cole used them and the way he changed up his flow on Still Tipping, and you know, hardest shit out of the South since slavery. I mean, come on, man. But that's not taking anything away from Common, because I went back and listened to it again today, and he was definitely spitting. And I share your point that it's amazing to see a guy as accomplished as he is, you know, a guy who literally has an Emmy, an Oscar, and multiple Grammys, and he still wants to go and freestyle. The interesting thing is he made no mention of the fact that he was releasing an album this week. And, you know, but he and Cole both actually use this LA Leakers format as a way to introduce their albums. Cole is very explicit about it. Common just went in, burned it down, and then let, you know, heads find the album on their own. But what do you think of that now as a way? You know, I feel like that the rollout has gotten more and more compressed. A lot of times people just drop an album with no marketing rollout at all. Or else it's just like a week or two. I've actually been lobbying for this for years. Internally, I've said it doesn't make sense. I've spoken with several manager friends of mine and said it makes no sense to market an album in this day and age before it's released, because you want to drive to streams. Everything is based on, you know, the economics and charts and everything are based on real-time streams. And so why would you market something that people can't actually go and listen to? So I actually think this is a step in the right direction of marketing. But what do you think of using freestyles as a marketing form?
I think it's a great calling card. I think it works exceptionally well for Common in this, because for as prolific as he is, and all of his albums are neatly defined, you know, that he is one of the most thematic you know, artists in all of music, let alone hip hop. I mean, throughout his career, you can usually think of a Common album and 1 or 2 themes that go with it in a much more defined way than most MCs, especially when you look at the late 90s and 2000s, when that just wasn't in vogue. People were trying to give you a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And, you know, and he's been passed over. So for this moment, to see Calm all over my timeline, to see people just rally for him, it's a great reminder. And then, to your point, when you get to the album, you see that it's a reflection of that. You know, this is a guy who wants you to know that he's an MC first before all else. I do challenge you a little bit. I think for the same reasons you're saying it makes no sense, you have to do a little bit of pre-album marketing. And even with Common, he put out 2, if not 3 singles before this week. And the sad truth is, I don't know about you, but for me, at midnight on Friday, I'm checking release radar, because there's so many artists out there that don't have publicists. And I don't spend all of my time on social media to see who's doing what, but you need to get somebody that's listened to you in the last 6 months to get your song on their release radar, to see that they put out more music. You know, one other person this week that put out an album is AZ, and we did a story on it, added some joints to the playlist, and I looked at the comments on Facebook, and so many people were unaware that it was coming out, because that's just the nature of the beast. So you got to play the game a little bit.
But they were aware though when it was out, they became aware.
True, but if not for, and this isn't to be self-aggrandizing, but if not for AFH, how are you gonna find out? I mean, you're gonna wait till it takes the middle person to make it known.
I don't disagree with that.
Okay.
All I'm saying is that the timing when the middle person makes it known, I think, matters. And so we can make it known 2 weeks ago, and by the time the album comes, people have forgotten about it because attention spans are 2 days now, if that. But if we shine a light on it right when people can listen to it, then that's when it's going to drive the consumption. So I just see, and in some ways, your point about Kanye, I think, bolsters this, because his album, once people became aware, did better even on the second day. And I guarantee there's going to be upticks when there's a great video, when he goes on tour. There is still a bump after award shows and significant cultural moments like that.
Versus,
I don't know what it gets you to do it ahead of time. I just think it's an old school way of marketing.
That's fair. Let me ask you a question. And do you think, we're talking about the LA leakers, and it's funny too. You and I, you've lived in LA in recent years part-time, but I'm not in LA. I don't know Just Incredible. I don't know DJ Sour Milk. I've known them through these freestyles and through some of their interviews. But do you think the LA leakers have become the predominant freestyle venue for hip hop now?
I do. And I don't know if you made a really good point about the fact that this was stripped from us because of COVID. Because before COVID, you had a number of premier destinations for freestyles. I would say that Sway in the Morning was the top one, because Sway's been doing this for decades now. From the Sway and Tech show through Sway in the Morning on Shade 45. Funk Master Flex started doing it maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and he had been doing other freestyles, but for some reason he just started a solo freestyle segment. And that became gigantic. He obviously had the Black Thought freestyle, which was the biggest moment of hip hop that year, and still arguably maybe the biggest freestyle moment we've had in the last decade or longer. I think, and he had the Royce freestyle too, which you and I infamously had to pass on doing because we were taking a week to boycott gun violence. And I don't think that's something I wish had gotten more traction, because there was a lot of gun violence going on. I think it was after Las Vegas and 51 people were killed.
Yeah.
We took a stand by not publishing anything that had any kind of reference to gun violence for a week. And that was when the Royce freestyle dropped. Bootleg Kev in Philadelphia. I will say
Westwood.
Westwood. I'll toot my own horn. I think the backroom freestyle sessions that I oversaw at BT on 106 and Park were super dope. We had a lot of great cats come through that and do their thing.
Absolutely.
But I do think that since things have restarted, I can't remember a single Sway in the Morning freestyle that has crossed my radar. Has one crossed yours?
No. I can say that not being the case. And also, since the pandemic started, my daily relationship to hip hop has been less about video subscriptions in general. So I haven't been plugged in like that. And even with Common, a few hours before we posted, I started to see Pete Rock and other people celebrating this. I was like, oh man, it's Common. I gotta see, Common's an artist that gets me up out of my chair when he does something incredible. And this was that. And I shout out to LA Leakers because, they've had a really diverse list, which was true of Sway and Tech. I think it's true of Flex on his platform. But they're really getting people from all aspects of hip hop coming in and providing an incredible platform for them to show off.
Yeah, they have Polo G. They have all sorts of genres and surprising ones too, because I think people associate him with melodic rap, but he came on and spit.
Meg Thee Stallion back in the day, that was a breakthrough moment for her too, over Tupac beats when Meg, that's when she earned my attention. And one other thing that I just want to say to them, and this is by no means a knock at anyone that we've talked about that's held that down previously, but shout out to Justin and Sour Milk because they really keep the spotlight on the talent. You know, there aren't reaction shots too much of them, you know. And obviously we'd be remiss not to shout out Stretch and Bobbito, which, you know, are right up there with Sway and Tech as, you know, the pioneers on radio of having this before there was video at every show. But, you know, these guys, they let the artists be artists, and that's really, really dope.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I hope it continues. I hope some of these come back, like Sway, been doing it too long to let it go. So I'm looking forward to that, but it's great to have it. And so Common goes on, burns it down, and then, you know, I'm going through my new music on you know, on my app, and I see A Beautiful Revolution Part 2, and I got to confess, I don't even remember A Beautiful Revolution Part 1.
Yeah.
But and I press play kind of hesitantly because a lot of Common's albums of the 2010s haven't really landed with me in the same way that the ones previous to that did. I mean, B is one of my favorite albums, period. Like Water for Chocolate is my favorite Common album of all time. Resurrection is fantastic. He's had great albums. I know the second one, I'm forgetting the name, the one with the Lauryn Hill joint is maybe your favorite, right?
One Day It All Makes Sense. His third album.
Yeah,
you know, that put Common, you know, on my radar in a huge way. I mean, I already knew of him through Resurrection, but that to me was the superior album of the first three. And it's not unlike Andre 3000. Common did this thing in like 99, 2000, where he was just on the feature level, just killing, you know. And 199 with Sadat. He had a joint on Socrates album, Play This, that I've recently even made a song of the day and texted it to you. And then his guest verse on Respiration from Black Star. Whatever, and I've said this to Common over the years. I'm like, yo, man,
stakes is high.
Yeah. Like whatever you were doing in 97, 99, whatever you were drinking, whatever incense you were burning, like just show me the key, man. Show me the cheat code, because that was incredible art. But I agree with you. I think the last 10 years have been different for Common on a response level. You know, in his albums, you know, Black America Again, I mean, what a concept. Or even Nobody's Smiling, as you talk about us taking the boycott, you know, of content that week and not posting Royce. Common made a whole album that was inspired by, you know, the violence and brutality of Chicago at a time, and, you know, when that was making, you know, international headlines, and devoted his discography to that. I think that those are huge steps, but they haven't been met with the response. You know, even with Let Love 2 years ago, you and I were at the Roots picnic together, and Common premiered a joint produced by Jay Dilla, obviously posthumously, a Dilla beat. And we were really excited to share that news. And I remember it getting kind of a tepid response. And I thought, damn, this is a shame, because the verse itself was really good, and that made its way onto that album.
Yeah. So that song, that album, Black America Again, was probably the one that stood out most to me. But I remember Nobody's Smiling. I went to a release party for one of those. I can't remember which one it was, but Common performed a lot of the songs. It was super dope. But I've been a huge fan. You know, I saw him perform a number of times. I think the first time I saw him was at Tramps. And then I saw him at SOB's with his band, a Black girl named Becky. And I remember just how clear his voice was. You know,
what era would that have been? Electric Circus or before?
Oh, man, I think it was the B. I think it was around B. Yeah. Okay. So really, really incredible. And, you know, there's something about, a lot of times hip hop can, in my opinion, lose a couple shades of quality live, because a lot of times it's just the dudes playing the records and they're screaming and the mics aren't equalized properly and the vocals just don't sound good or clear. But when you go to a show and the sonics are what they should be, which is why the Roots are always on point, Common is always like an impeccable performer live. His voice just cuts through so clearly. Isaiah Rashad is one of those dudes too. The Cole concert you and I saw was like that as well. But, you know, so going back to this album, A Beautiful Revolution Part 2 comes out, and I pressed play, like I said, somewhat hesitantly, but was incredibly pleasantly surprised by what I heard. You know, this is as energetic and inspired as I've heard Common sound in quite some time. And I think that translated in the freestyle. Now, that's probably why it resonated as much as it did with you. and with the readers of AFH, because this was one of our biggest posts in quite some time. The album, and it just, musically was great. There's a song with Black Thought, and I think it's Sean Kuti, called "When We Move." This is Fela Kuti's son, I believe, and
yep,
it just, it's, Common is also one of those dudes who's embraced world music. I know Drake gets a lot of credit, but a lot of Common's music is Afrobeat. And this is that, and it just is fantastic. And he has multiple collaborations with a woman named PJ, but it's one of his best albums sonically in quite some time. And like I said, his flow is very lively. But what did you think about it?
I agree with everything you just said, and yeah, I was really happy for hip hop that, full transparency behind the curtain, a Common freestyle pancaked, just in terms of traffic awareness. All that's gone on in the last week with Drake. I can't say that entirely for Kanye, but I love to see that, not because of who it is, but because of what it is. And this is music, this is skills. I really like the album. Shout out to Kareem Riggins, who produced it all. And I often feel that, it's not mentioned enough that Kareem and Common have been working together for 25 years. Kareem did the Pop's outro on One Day It'll All Make Sense, which I didn't even realize. And, for those that know, Common and Dilla were roommates at the end of Dilla's life. I spoke to Common when he was living with Dilla, one of the first times that we spoke. And, Riggins, Kareem is, Dilla's kind of instrumental right hand, can play the drums, can play all these different things. And they had worked together on some of Dilla's albums, like Welcome to Detroit, and some of the other stuff after that. So that's not even being talked about. But I think there is a world music element here. And there's also something going on, in the Louisiana, like the Delta. The fact that he has Marcus King, who, throughout the pandemic, I've discovered or rediscovered a love of blues music. And Marcus King is one of the contemporary movers and shakers of that. And they have a joint on here called Poetry, also with Isaiah Sharkley, that it's probably my song of the album. And to your point, Calm just kills it with, lyrical content and what he has to say. And then I also like the song right after it, Saving Grace, with the Alabama Shakes Brittany Howard, who doesn't even need that qualifier. I mean, her own solo music is incredible, and she is a phenomenal performer. So again, this album has, like, you have a tinge of Afrobeat, but a kind of some blues and bluegrass and roots music from the American South. And, again, I give Common so much credit because thematically as well as musically, every album is different. Common caught hell for Electric Circus, which, I think was in large part due to the fact of just how much we, including you and I, loved, like Water for Chocolate. And he comes with this album with a live band, very much Prince inspired, some of it even recorded at Paisley Park. And it wasn't what we wanted. But you know what? I listened to that album in retrospect, and it was very ahead of its time. And there's moments from it that I still take with me today. The other, Universal Mind Control, which was Common kind of going back to electro funk, and, was panned by and large. And again, shout out to a guy who isn't afraid to take the ball and try something new with it time and time again. And I agree with you. This album is very much swimming around my top albums of the year list. And I feel that, I'm so happy we have this venue to talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, you mentioned Electric Circus, and I did have that reaction to it, but Universal Mind Control, I love, because that took me back to those days, and it sounded very much like Looking for the Perfect Beat, Afrika Bambaataa and then Soulfly Force, and we're going to talk about him in a few minutes too. But then it also had Come Close on it too, which is one of my favorite Common joints. I think his ballads or his love songs, I should say, like The Light and Come Close, are where he really stands out. And then the Come Closer remix came from that by Pharrell, which was to the Bonita Applebum.
I forgot about that. Yeah,
which is incredible. So that you're right. That album keeps bearing fruit. And this one, so sonically, again, it sounds great. And part of it too might be that the streaming platforms are starting to upgrade their technology. So Apple has got like a lossless format now, and Spotify is going to do it soon too. And so when you do that, you can hear the music breathe differently. You can hear every nuance in it. And this one having the live instrumentation that it does, because a lot of times when you're compressed with samples and things like that, you don't get that sonic energy. But the live instrumentation really lets it breathe. And this album features a lot of that. So this is also the opposite. You mentioned Drake. This is the opposite of Ye and Drake in that it's only 11 songs, to Drake's 21 and Kanye's 27. And, Drake is 88 minutes and Kanye is almost 2 hours. This is only 38 minutes long. So it's a really quick and easy listen. I will listen to it multiple times. I want to spend a lot more time with it. It's interesting that it comes a week after Drake, because it's actually the third consecutive week that people who have kind of had some dust ups are releasing albums, because Ye or Drake and Common, there was I can't remember which song Common released that was dissing Drake. Oh, So Sweet. He had a song called So Sweet where he was dissing Drake. And then Drake came back at him on Stay Scheming with Rick Ross and French Montana. And to my knowledge, I don't know if they've ever resolved their differences.
I think I read that they adapted up at an award show or a sporting event, All-Star Weekend or something like that. I think it's done. I think it's put to bed. And actually, as you were talking about, the best album Common put out previous to this of recent, The Dreamer, The Believer was a really good album to me that I felt like got lost in the sauce. Sort of like what we were talking about with Pusha, or even with these Kanye and Drake albums, what people look for and what they run with. That was his reunion with No ID. He had a Nas collaboration on there that I really loved. And, what people tend to remember about 2011 Common is beefing with Drake.
Yeah. And that was 10 years ago. So that's why I say, the last 10 years, Common is a Tony away from having an EGOT. Jennifer Hudson just made the news this week. She won an Emmy for producing a show called Oculus Quest. And, she has an Oscar, obviously, from Dreamgirls and a couple of Grammys. She was, a lot of people believe, snubbed because The Color Purple, the soundtrack that she won a Grammy for, was also a play, and she didn't get a Tony nomination for that. But of these two, Common and Jennifer Hudson, which one do you think has a greater chance of getting an EGOT, or which one will get it sooner?
I think Jennifer can get it sooner. I think that Common has it in him. And, even the way that Common has delivered some of his songs, I've seen it. We've covered it on the site when he's done performances, I think on Fallon with the Roots. Common is a true artist at every level. And if it was worth his time, I could see him going to Broadway. And even what's funny is, he mentions that in the freestyle, damn near EGOT, and he's still hip hop, which I thought was like, boom, that's the thesis of what exactly we're talking about. But I digress. Who do you think can get it first? And if not Common, does he have it within him?
Yeah, I think Jennifer. Jennifer, she's about to come out with the Aretha. I think it may be out already, the Aretha Franklin film, and she's just such a strong singer and actress, and is doing so much work in those genres now that I think that she's probably the most likely to get another Broadway gig. I don't know, when or if Common would be able to get that kind of gig. And so I think she's probably got the best chance of doing it.
Let me ask you one other question. I think of Common in this chapter of the last, especially 5 years, and it kind of reminds me a little bit of Speech and Arrested Development. I mean, you and I are both Arrested Development fans. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Absolutely. And there's certain artists in hip hop that I feel that, the nice guy image holds them back. I mean, Common has come so far from, can I borrow $1 Common, let alone beefing with Ice Cube, so on and so forth. But my mom knows who Common is. Your mom probably knows who Common is. Like he has become all of these things. Do you think that has gotten in the way of people appreciating strictly just his MC skills? That's
an interesting question. I don't think so. only because there are two other artists I can think of who have kind of evolved into that in Hollywood, but still people regard them as spitters. One is Ice Cube, who was making, shows, movies like Are We There Yet? And other like really family friendly films. But he's still Ice Cube to most people. A lot of people still think of him first and foremost as that dude from NWA, from, America's Most Wanted, from, the rap that he did in the 90s that established who he is. The second is, I'm losing my train of, LL Cool J. So LL, spitter, like for 20 years, like was the self-proclaimed GOAT, and I still think should be in that conversation. And now he's the guy on NCI and who's been acting for years and Lip Sync Battle and all these things. But to hip hop people, he's still LL, and that dude who will get on the mic and will surprise you with a Dr. Dre accompanied freestyle and ring some heads, when he needs to. So I think that Common is the same way in hip hop. And to your point, that's why this freestyle was important. He let people know who he is again.
Yeah, I mean, Common's always done that. I think it's after one of his songs, remember, on like Water for Chocolate, I believe, where he turns into a pimp and like, is talking to one of his ladies and, using the B word and all of that. Common's had fun with that, but I do feel that in a different way than Cube. I mean, Cube can easily flick the switch back into, 91 Cube. And there's opportunities. I think of him checking Bill Maher, which we covered on the site. And LL has always carried himself with such a air of respect. I mean, truly a nice guy. But, if I saw LL having dinner with, his wife next to me, I might not want to run out. Like, I might give the respect because you don't want to get checked. And I feel like Common is so approachable. I mean, and he's been that way for a while, that I do feel that it's not sometimes cool to be Common fan. And recently, man, I was a guest on a podcast called Acquired Taste with Cell, and I talked about Common. Common is an artist that has been in my top 5 list, and I'm perfectly proud to say it. And maybe that shows through in some of the ways that I view this freestyle in this album. But I say all that to say, I think it's time that we as hip hop give this man his due and his flowers. And if you weren't interested or motivated to listen to a new album by Common, now is your chance. You will not be disappointed.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it's funny that you use that example of approachability, because the first time I ever met Common, I was actually in a spa. I just had a massage.
Yeah.
And apparently he did too. And we were in the locker room. Literally, both of us, were unclothed, and it's an awkward moment. Like, it's like, oh man, this is Common. Like, yeah. So we both got dressed in silence, and once we were dressed, I was like, "Hey, what's up, man? Much respect, Reggie from BT, blah blah blah." Yeah. He's like, "Oh, where, how you doing?" Like, blah blah blah. But it was, it's just like it was like this, the etiquette that you have when you're standing in the bathroom at the urinals. Times 10, you know what I mean? Like, so, but he is definitely an approachable, warm, engaging dude, but I don't think it takes away from his rap credibility.
Since you shared a vulnerable Common story, I will as well. 2005, right after Beat comes out, I was living in Philly, but I went home. Late in life, I was in my 20s, had to get all 4 wisdom teeth removed. So you need somebody that's like making sure you don't like choke in your sleep or all that. So I, went back, as we're talking about moms, and I stayed with my mom in Pittsburgh. And back then, I needed to record all of my interviews on a landline so I could record it into a tape. And, I'm on heavy painkillers, so passed out, space that I had an interview, very rare time that happened. And Common called, and my mom answered, and they carried on for like 3 or 4 minutes. And I remember I woke up and she was like, Common called. And this was before he was, in film. And I just remember being really embarrassed that had happened. But also kind of humored by the fact that they spoke. And when I did speak to Common like a day or so later, he was real cool about it. I mean, shout out to him. But yeah, man, that's funny. We both got somewhat vulnerable Rashid stories.
Yeah, man. And shout out to your mom. She's made a cameo in a past podcast. And so, yeah,
she did.
We talked about Universal Mind Control and its electro funk influences and a pioneer of electro funk and hip hop generally, has been in the news. So you and I have gone back and forth about this. You know, for those who've watched this in the past, we've talked about the fact that we have a document that's kind of like our living, breathing writing room. And it's not only a place where we put ideas, but we have an exchange of dialogue. It's where we actually kind of workshop what we're going to talk about, how we're going to talk about it, why we're going to talk about it, if we're going to talk about it. And one of the things we've gone back and forth about this week is Afrika Bambaataa being in the news and whether or not we should cover it. It's a very, very sensitive subject. It is incredibly uncomfortable. It's unfortunate on many levels, tragic, sad, disturbing. There's not enough like adjectives that I can put to talk about just how tough of a subject this is. And, you know, the whole premise of Ambrosia for Heads is we try and deal in positivity. We try, we're going to talk about the beast and stuff like that because we're not going to put hip hop on a pedestal. We understand it's a competitive culture and that resonates with people and with us too. But we try not to get into gossip. We try not to get into the like sordid details of people's lives and things like that. But on occasion, there's something that affects someone who is so critical to hip hop culture that we do cover it because it's newsworthy. And, you know, we try and put a spin on it that has more depth, more respect, and just doesn't, dabble in the salaciousness. But this is one that's very, very tough. And I was not down for it. Jake was down to report it. We started talking about it before we started recording this podcast. And I said, you know what, let's just have this conversation and be transparent with the people who engage with this podcast about our process. And so here we are, Afrika Bambaataa. Do you want to talk about it?
Yeah. So for those that are not aware, 5 years ago, in 2016, Afrika Bambaataa was accused by a man named Ronald Savage, a Bronx politician, of sexual assault that had transpired during the early 1980s. And there is really well done, in my opinion, stories on Ambrosia for Heads that covered this. We kind of had the same discussions in the documents 5 years ago and felt that it was our obligation to our readers, to the alleged victims, to just how we cover this culture, to report it. And since that time, at first, Afrika Bambaataa vehemently released a statement, vehemently denied those accusations. At least two other accusers came forward with similar accusations that Bambaataa had, varying sexual misconduct, including rape and sodomy when they were of underage. And that came forward. During that time, the same year, 2016, Afrika Bambaataa steps down as kind of the president and face of the Universal Zulu Nation, the organization that is near and dear to hip hop and something that Afrika Bambaataa created in the 1970s with some other individuals as an alternative to street gangs or street organizations in the Bronx, and had unified all of these different organizations under the same tenets that hip hop says of peace, love, having fun, understanding, so on and so forth. And since that time, Afrika Bambaataa has been, very much removed from the public light. As those, victims have spoken in various publications about, their experience and just how much it affected their lives. This week, we learned that formal charges were pressed. The individual pressing them is just being named John Doe due to the sensitivities and the rights that they have. No formal name, has been released to the public. But, in August 4th, it was filed in the New York State Supreme Court. And this individual alleged that between 1991 and 1995, he was sex trafficked. And the misconduct took place at Bam's residence in the Bronx, in the Bronx River section. And, at this point, it looks very likely that Afrika Bambaataa will be in court to defend his position. And,
this is civil liability, right? This is not criminal. This is civil.
As I understand it, correct. And Rolling Stone, Pitchfork, this has been covered, out there. And it's interesting to me, just as a timeout, um, I've been a fan of the Star and Buck Wild show since they were on, terrestrial radio in New York and in Philadelphia, elsewhere. And this is something that Star in particular had talked about for years, and then recently through his own platforms was instrumental in getting some of the accusers to come forward and speak about. And this week, one other thing that I should add is Universal Zulu Nation, in a comment to several publications, reminded them of their position that this is an Afrika Bambaataa issue. This is not a UZN issue. And they can take all those matters up. BAM has not, as of the time we're recording this, released a statement. But yeah, I mean, to what you said, and I appreciate that precursor, it's a really, really messy situation. And it's, it's complicated that one of the longtime pioneers of hip hop, allegedly, did these heinous acts. And what was interesting to me is in the weeks and months leading up to those 2016 allegations, there were people, including, KRS-One and Crazy Legs. There was a coalition of fellow, hip hop legends that were really standing around Afrika Bambaataa and positioning him as, one of the true founders. Coming off of August, we celebrate, DJ Kool Herc, and rightfully so. But Afrika Bambaataa, was very much a part of that, and so was Grandmaster Flash. And Flash has come forward and even said, now that BAM's no longer in the discussion due to this, Herc, give me my props. Let's do this together. And that obviously hasn't happened. So at the same time as these accusations, it's very much a tug of war over the pioneers and founders of this thing that we love, and the reason why you and I have this podcast.
Yeah, it's a really unfortunate situation, very difficult, calls into question, whether you should separate the person from the product, or, the person from the art. I think it gets very, very difficult to start to cancel everything that person has done, because, where does that stop? But obviously, if these accusations are true, then there is no co-signing. There's, it is a very disturbing and unfortunate thing to have happened. We'll see what happens in court, but yeah, it's been a really tough thing to discuss and cover over the years.
Yeah, and I'll just say this, and I mean, this is speculation, but from what I've understand, I do not know that Afrika Bambaataa is in the United States right now. And, we've seen Roman Polanski being a great example of folks being accused of heinous things that just do not return. I'll be curious how this plays out. My heart and sympathies go out to all of these victims, and I've been put in a hard position as of do we talk about it here? And also, even in a situation like celebrating every August 11th, this birthday of hip hop, which is obviously, centered around Kool Herc and his sister Cindy in the rec center, at 1520, Sedgwick. I think it is our obligation to mention Bambaataa historically. And for me, that goes with his contributions and his records. And that part doesn't change, but we have to, as a culture, talk about these things that are messy as well. And, it's not lost on me that several of the pioneers of rock and roll, as we understand it, have, similar accusations and transgressions that were treated differently in those times. And we continue, the rock and roll community continues to play their music. It's a complicated situation.
Yeah, I agree with that. So moving on to more positive things. One of the fruits that the Drake album yielded was a lot of people have started to get on his Champagne Poetry track and put their own touch on it. And Freddie Gibbs did that with the Champagne Poetry freestyle, which was, I'd say, first of all, really well done. Another great freestyle, but then also controversial, I'm sure intentional. He's trying to I think he's trying to capitalize on a couple of zeitgeist moments. So he uses a Drake track, to take shots at Kendrick Lamar, and it was a response to Kendrick's Baby Keem Family Ties verse, similar to the way that a lot of people came at Kendrick after he dropped Control, because Kendrick was very, very aggressive in that Family Ties verse, saying he's smoking on your top fives and don't address him unless it's 4 letters, which most people assume is GOAT. So Gibbs hit him with a couple shots, and he also took some shots at BET, saying that they had ignored his work, almost as if he wasn't black. And at the Grammys, saying that the album Alfredo that he did last year with Alchemist was the best of the year, and that even Nas, who had won the Best Rap Album award for King's Disease, had acknowledged that. So, pretty tough words from Gangsta Gibbs.
Yeah.
What was your take on the freestyle?
I didn't like it as much as you did. I agree with everything that you said, in terms of unpacking it. Let's not forget, when Kendrick and Kanye did No More Parties in LA, Gibbs, just like this, followed with his own rendition, which had complicated history given the fact that that was a Mad Lib track and all of that. I mean, Gibbs is unafraid of mixing it up, and he's been very outspoken throughout his career. Most notably, we've seen that with his relationship with Jeezy, but also, Gibbs talks it like he walks it. I don't know that I was ready for this one. I mean, it did just drop. I'm still on some, okay, let's let the original breathe. But Gibbs and Drake have two very different rap aesthetics. Although I believe Freddie Gibbs put Drake in his top 5. We covered that on this podcast, did we not?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, he did. Yeah.
And Drake kind of has this, smooth, image, and Gibbs is, kind of the opposite. When he said it, I think that Kendrick puts those things out there for the challenging, and it's within Gibbs's nature to do that. I would like him to prove that point with some more great music. As far as the Grammys, my own take is this. We talked about it earlier this year. I believe The Allegory was the best album that competed. I think that wholeheartedly, and our own readers agreed with us, that the previous year in January of 2020, Freddie Gibbs was robbed. I mean, Freddie Gibbs and Madlib with Bandana wasn't even nominated. And that, to me, the only other album that should have possibly won that year in that category is Rhapsody's Eve. And of course, that night went to Tyler for Igor, and even Tyler was like, it wasn't a rap album. So I do agree with Gibbs. I mean, he continues to be slept on, and he does all these great accomplishments. The BET thing is funny, but I think I need some more show and prove as far as competing with Kendrick, and that's just me.
Well, speaking of Kendrick, he had a second verse that came out on Range Brothers, Baby Keem's, a song on Baby Keem's new album, which came out on Friday. And this one did not get the same kind of reaction that the Family Ties verse did. It was a fine verse. I think it was really just like 4 lines, really, when it came down to it, and some ad libs. But the ad libs have been getting clowned on the internet. Have you seen that?
Yeah, I saw some syncs. You mean the Top of the Morning?
Yeah, Top of the Morning and some other stuff. Like, people hang on every single word with Kendrick, which is a credit to who he is. That he can literally break the internet with a verse. But I think sometimes people take him a bit too seriously. Sometimes it's fun. It is what it is. It's not a huge statement and doesn't need to be. And this is one where it's like, okay, cool.
These are just the times we're living in. People want laughs. People have ideas. That's kind of where comedy's at. And but I agree with you. I mean, I think for as great as Family Ties was, Range Brothers, and you and I texted about it briefly, it's cool. And I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah. Did you listen to Keem's album?
I am 2/3 through it, and it's funny because that's 2/3 I keep coming back to. I really like the way that it opens. He's got a lot of heart and soul and conviction to him. And then there are songs on there that, and this is probably an age thing. I'm damn near twice dude's age, but that just are kind of lost on me. But similar to Family Ties, it's not lost on me that over time, over multiple listens, this one can catch up to me. I thought it was an interesting album, but it's one, every time I play it, I don't have that full window to listen to, sort of what we're talking about with time. But what about you?
Yeah, I've only listened to it once, and his music, I've learned with him, especially, even Family Ties was this way to not really speak about his music until I spent some time with it
Mm.
because his music and his concepts in general are just very complex,
Yeah.
deceptively so. Immediate standout for me though was Issues, which I really really loved, and the video for that came out. He's several videos now where he doesn't actually lip sync the vocals. Sometimes we'll have people around him doing it. Other times he'll just be like just stone faced and walking or riding a bike, as is the case in this video. And I think it's a really interesting aesthetic. It's something that like has become uniquely his, I think. And that song is just fantastic. I love it. Obviously, I love Family Ties. Do Rag Activity is a joint that he'd released before with Travis Scott. I like the fact that his features are him and the artist instead of featuring the artist. But I need to spend some more time with it. There are definitely some songs that might not ever become my cup of tea, but I think that I'm going to like the album more and more as it goes.
Trademark USA is the name of the opener that I've probably played 10 times since it came out. And I added it right to my playlist. And I'm just like, wow, this shows me the dimension and range of an artist. And on that particular track, he's on his own, because up until this point, my biggest look for Keem was obviously just a few weeks ago with Family Ties. So yeah, I'm going to keep sitting with it. I like the way you put that.
Yeah. And so other new music, an artist named Yeba came out with an album, and I had never heard of Yeba until last week. We talked about her. She was on Certified Lover Boy. Not only was she on the album, but the song I think name checks her, and she's the only person who has a vocal on the album, well, on the song, which is crazy. So she's on a Drake album with a song, and she's the only person who sings and is heard on it. And so I thought that was really interesting. It's called Yeba's Heartbreak. Drake has done this before where he's co-signed artists and made them huge. And what incredible intro to have go from no one or relatively no one having ever heard from you to being on the biggest album of the year and then dropping your album just a week later.
In a 1 week period. That's insane. Yeah.
Yeah. Really crazy. So shout out to her. I like the album. Really interesting. Almost like a Una type of sound,
Okay. Yeah.
Una, um, you know, Janae Eiko, that kind of sound. So really, really cool.
I need to check that one out. It was a big week for music. I mentioned it earlier in the podcast, but AZ put out Doe or Die 2, which we're not going to talk about too much because I think that there will be time for toast and tea with that one for us on an upcoming episode. But I think that one of the takeaways is it's AZ just stays in stride. And you and I have talked about artists like Royce and Evidence and these guys that had put in work in the late 90s or the early 90s that have never deviated. And AZ has been really careful about his craft. I mean, he hasn't put out a project in 11 years, just a couple of little, street joints and then some loosies. But he really went back, and I thought it's a very evolved album. I love the fact that he went and got Pete Rock and Buck Wild on there, who contributed to the original back in '95. And you put Keep It Real, which I think is, just great standalone AZ. He's the only person on the song. On our playlist right now, it's currently the first song, and people need to subscribe and check that joint out. And then also, just on the exciting tip of as far as collaborations, he's got a joint called Ritual with Conway the Machine and Lil Wayne on an Alchemist beat. And I really like this record a lot. And I think that Wayne, on paper, this one might sound exciting, but it might sound like a mashup in your mind. All three of them just bring their A game. But Wayne, who's put out some great records in recent years, just really a top tier feature in my opinion on that one.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I share your opinion that we'll probably talk about this more extensively on another ep. So I'll let your words stand because I agree with it all. But yeah, great to see this one finally make it 20 years in the making, or thereabouts since the first Do or Die. So shout out to AZ for sure.
Another album that came out on Friday was a posthumous release from Gift of Gab from Blackalicious, who died in June, June 18th to be exact. And at the time of his death, he had been working on an album called Finding Inspiration Somehow, which is an interesting title. And it comes out through Nature Sounds, which, has put out albums by Pete Rock and Blue, Durag Dynasty with Alchemist, a really good catalog over the last 20 years. I don't know that they've worked previously with Gab that I can remember. But as I think I've talked about on this podcast, I'm a huge Blackalicious fan. I often think that the Quantum Projects and Soul Side's crew is criminally overlooked when we talk about underground hip hop in the '90s and early 2000s. And Gift of Gab is a phenomenal MC. You and I recently spoke about great voices in hip hop, and he has just such a rich mahogany voice. And on top of it, for a bigger guy, what he could do with his flow in terms of just speed it up, slow it down, the alliteration. I think a lot of people know Blackalicious through Alphabet Aerobics, which is one of several classic hip hop songs that really plays with the alphabet and alliteration and sequence. But to me, they've always been sort of like Biz and Just a Friend. Blackalicious has always been so much more than that. There's a lot of soul to that group. And I encourage anyone who's never heard it to check out the Melodica EP that they came out with in the early days with Latyrix and DJ Shadow. But, from this album, I was eager to check it out just because I knew Gab. His loss has affected me. And I wanted to see what the man had to say. I spoke about it last week with his song Alchemy. And I really enjoy this joint. It's sad because, sort of like the title may suggest, it's kind of a positive album in the face of depressing times. He has a record on there called You're Gonna Make It in the End. That is, just kind of like vitamin C for the heart and soul of, kind of We Will Survive type joint. I mentioned Alchemy. And also he remixed a song that we had covered on AFH some years back, the Gentrification song, which, Gab was from, born in Los Angeles, but reps Sacramento. I think anybody that knows anything about what's going on in Northern California knows that gentrification is real, as it is in the city you live in and the city I live in. And it's a great, we've covered it with regards to like Master Ace in Brooklyn, and a lot of rappers, Sky Zoo, are covering gentrification, but this is a really great example of that. So for anyone that appreciated Blackalicious, Soul Sides, Quantum, definitely an album worth checking out. And it's certainly bittersweet because the man who made it, passed away after really fighting with his kidney disease, including getting a transplant last year.
Or I haven't gotten to that one yet, but I definitely will. I definitely appreciated some of their work. I'm not as familiar with it as you are, but I have been listening to it for 20 plus years now. So yeah, sad, man. Very, very sad. So many losses this year. So many losses.
Yeah, man. And we put Blackalicious, to our credit, when we did our Finding the GOAT Greatest Groups. They were in there, which I'm one of those things I'm just kind of proud of. So one other album that I'm just going to shout out, and then two Lucy's. Folks may or may not be familiar with Damu the Fudgemunk. He's certainly a star within the beat community. I call it instrumental hip hop. Some folks out there call it lo-fi. There's a lot of debates over the terminology. But, as somebody that has worked with guys like Blue, and other MCs on the production tip. Him and Blue put out an exceptional album a few years ago. I think we may have even spoken about it with Blue when we had him and Mickey Fax on a few episodes ago. But he put out a joint called Conversation Piece, which gave him access to the KPM library, which is interesting. I mean, I know a lot about sampling. I'm not up on library records. You know what those are?
No.
So I mean, those were like.
Oh, you mean like stock music libraries?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I built one at BT.
Oh, damn. Okay. All right. Cool flex. I like
the BT collection. Yeah.
So I guess for those that follow library records, when you talk to guys like Alchemist or Vanderslice and Stu Bangers, these heavy duty diggers that build up names for themselves, library records are sacred. Because especially during the 70s and 80s, they had really good sounds. And if you sampled them, they were harder to track. Now with technology, different stories. So KPM gave Damu access to their archives. Do what you will, and we've kind of seen that more and more with like Madlib and Blue Note. Just some different folks like that. And what's cool is it's not an instrumental album. He brought Blue and Nitty Scott MC and Insight and I've really been enjoying it. And it's a very artful, you know, veers into jazz. There's all these complex rhythms. But that's my most listened to album of the last week. I mean, in the face of Donda and CLB, that is what I keep playing. So I wanted to shout that out on this venue. Also, just as a note, Blue in Exile, you know, who made Below the Heavens, recently reunited for a new joint called Call Me Blue, which has a classic 80s hip hop sample in its beat that I will not state, but that people will enjoy. And yeah, just one other thing that I'll mention too is Bronze Nazareth, who is, you know, a Wu-Tang Clan affiliate, has a new album produced by Rock Marciano in full. And he put out his first single this week called The Precipice, which, you know, Bronze is one of those guys among the greater Wu-Tang family tree that I feel like makes really good music, sometimes doesn't get mentioned enough. And the fact that this one, he's working with Rock, and Rock had all these ties to different Wu members. It excites me. So I've been playing that one a lot too.
Yeah, I don't think Rock gets enough credit for his production chops, man. Just so soulful. Like that dude is supremely talented and has carved out his own genre, and he's fathered a lot of styles too. You know, bringing it all the way back to Kanye. I think opposite end of the spectrum from melodic rap, he's carved out that connoisseur rap term that our guy Justin Hunt, our extended family from AFH, uses, and that I think is very, very descriptive of what this is. So yeah, shout out to that. And so I got a couple joints I need to download today then. So that's dope.
Yeah, man. Any other new music for you this week that is worth highlighting?
Not hip hop, man. I downloaded a bunch of stuff. I told you about Yeba. I listened to J Balvin, Jose. You know, I've actually downloaded Starcross by Casey Musgraves. Gonna check that out. And we talked about Keem. So yeah, that's it for me.
You put me on to what may be my favorite album this year, and it's not in the hip hop genre, Cleo Soul. You know, which that's another one that I just really enjoy. Her album is called Mother. Yeah, man, a lot of good music out there. I got to check out some of those that you just mentioned. But what's your song of the week, man?
Well, song of the week, that's a tough one, man. I'm gonna go with When We Move, Common with Black Thought, and Sean Kuti. I just think it's just so dynamic and so great to hear Common back enjoying himself with hip hop. Really dope.
Yeah, man, I like that. I'm gonna shout out a joint that I neglected to mention called Roof by Wiki. People might know Wiki from Rat King, which was a, you know, Harlem group that was put on to me by Ad Rock of the Beastie Boys when he remixed some of their stuff. I think we covered it on AFH like, you know, 7, 8, 9 years ago. But I really enjoy, I mean, you know, at a time when New York is changing, I love the fact that Wiki makes these records that really feel super authentic to me. He's got a great flow, great vulnerability and personality. And the song is about all the different things over the years that he's done on the roof, which might sound mundane, but there's a lot of depth and just slickness to that. So I encourage everyone to check that joint out.
That sounds dope. Well, yo, glad we did it, man. Always a pleasure. Yeah.
Until we do it again, man, we got some treats coming up.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. All right.
All right, man. Peace.
Peace.